Ageless masters of the galaxy, the Necrons emerge from stasis tombs to reclaim worlds lost to the ravages of time and the encroachment of lesser races. Coldly regal and slow to acknowledge outsiders as being worthy of survival, the Necrons will sweep aside all in their path in their quest to restore lost glories. Now rise once again and reclaim your lost dynasty. Hello there everyone. It is time to finally dive into the Necron tomb ships and see what they are capable of. For they are an incredibly resilient faction that kind of encourage long drawn out type of battles with very limited means to do damage quickly in a lot of circumstances. They have constant regeneration on their health to complement the fact that every single one of their ships has the heavy armor on all three arcs of their ship, so you're going to be looking at 83 armor all around for everything. And with that said, all their weapons are completely 100% accurate. They are never going to miss outside the range limitations of the weapons themselves. And best of all, their particle whips will completely ignore shields, allowing you to get straight to the hull damage of your ship should you be equipped with any of these weapons. Every single one of the capital ships are also included with their own fighter bays with the Doomscythe transfer ability, which is a unique type of fighter that I have yet to go over in all the other factions so far, in that the Doomscythes, as well as with the exception of the Orc fighters, will do hull damage on top of shooting down point defense, destroying enemy fighters and torpedoes. This makes them very versatile, if not a little bit tricky to get full value out of a lot of the times. They also come with a full complement of their own type of unique stances, as well as a bunch of unique traits that no other faction even comes close to having access to. For the reactive hull, allows them to completely regenerate light critical hit effects after 60 seconds, and they also regenerate their point defense and even their crew complement, their troops, every 60 seconds as well. When you consider the fact that your weaponry will always hit, and the fact, like I said, their health regenerates over time, the Necron want to kill things slowly and make the opponent suffer, as it were. Although due to the fact that they don't have access to like high energy turn or even just all ahead full in general, you only have access to a one-time kind of cooldown effect ability in their inertialist drive. And mind you, this is like single-handedly the most potent type of mobility you can get in the game. It can be really easily misused due to the fact that you can actually choose how far you can teleport. And this will, however, incur the full cooldown regardless of the distance you're jumping. So while an incredibly powerful ability, if you don't know how to get the most out of it, you can find yourselves in a lot of situations where you can get run down or swarmed by your opponent, either through their sheer numbers or other high damage weaponry. They also have the highest morale rating of all the other factions, which is going to be a little bit odd looking over Necrons, for they don't actually have a rally ability or even an encouraging speech-like ability. The closest that they have access to is their Ancestral Terror ability, which only the battleship itself has access to. The good news here is that all battleships you can field will have access to this, but due to the point cost of these ships, you're only going to be able to field 2 of them at a time, at most. But it adds the additional bonus of also penalizing or damaging the morale of the enemy ship should you aim it at them. It goes without saying, with the morale and all the other traits they have really good crew complements as well as boarding potential, with the additional effect of Necron portals, which allows their lightning strikes effects to be even more potent. To give you a rough example, it basically allows the lightning strikes to do the exact same amount of boarding damage as for the light cruisers' regular assault actions, with slightly slower diminishing returns for cruisers and more so as you progress upward. So it's a really damn potent way to get additional value out of your boarding if you want to cripple and isolate ships, on top of the fact that they have a 60% chance of said boarding assault actions to do crippling damage. I also already talked about their unique stances, one of which is the reactive hull shift, which synergizes with the hull colorization effect that causes your health to regenerate. It basically triples the effect there, allowing you to weather the storm should your opponent be trying to fixate on a single target, which normally will either be the flagship or maybe your battleship or the largest ship that you're fielding into the fleet there. And this allows it to tank damage heavily. You don't have to worry about shields being like a pitiful source of weathering damage there due to the fact that shields have no armor resistance on them. Nope, you can use your health as a means to deflect a lot of this damage. Although there is a little nuanced note that due to the Necron's sheer reliance on regenerating health over the course of battle, it does reduce the maximum hull value of the ship. And what this simply means is that, say for example a tomb ship which has 2,400 health to start off with, as you regenerate this health, the maximum amount of value that you can recover to, if given enough time, will slowly decrease at the exact same rate. And don't be fooled by what it says with the reactive hull shift. If you use this or other abilities that further increase your regeneration, it will also decrease the maximum value you can regenerate by the same amount. So you can't cheat the system, alas, by using reactive hull shift exclusively. But it will greatly accelerate your health regeneration should you be taking a lot of damage to a single ship, especially if you manage to disengage safely. And another very unique ability which replaces the lock-on trait is the Dispersed Lightning Arc. This can be really damn powerful if utilized properly, due to the fact that the majority of the Necron weaponry is fixed at 9,000 unit range, especially since you no longer have lock-on to help augment that further. You are going to have a hard time getting multiple shots on multiple ships there. But if you know you're going to be committing to a battle, or your opponent's going to be committing to a close range engagement, then this will do absurd amount of damage. And from what I can tell, this does not discriminate the critical hit chance of your lightning arcs. If once you get through the shields, you're going to have pretty much the same chance of critically hitting with the secondary targets as you would for the primary target. And another unique trait that will be incredibly difficult to utilize is the fact that the Dispersed Lightning Arc has the potential to hit a single target multiple times. That is assuming that other ships that are within range of your Lightning Arc are directly behind the ship that you want to focus down on. This potentially allows you to double, maybe even triple the damage on a single ship if the stars align properly. Although realistically you should only expect this maybe for one salvo, possibly two depending on the movement of the fleets, but this will allow you to rapidly accelerate how quickly you can kill individual targets. And the final weapon at their arsenal, which in a weird sense is not really a weapon, for it's essential for the Necron fleets to defend themselves against an array of torpedoes and bombers, it's the Star Pulse Wave. It does not ignore armor, so while the 250 damage is impressive, it will a lot of the times be heavily mitigated by a lot of the factions you're coming up against there. So Imperial Navy and Adeptus Mechanicus will hardly feel the damage you're dealing to them, while the Eldari are sure to want to flee even further once you start activating this within range. But the main value of the Star Pulse Wave is, as it says in the description, it will immediately destroy fighters, bombers, and torpedoes that get within a 4,500 unit range. This goes without saying is really damn important to utilize to full effect, for Necron generally have a lot less point defense than most other ships of their class. A battleship would have 21 point defense normally. The Karn Tomb ship has almost half that. So it goes without saying you're going to rely a lot on your Doom Scythes and your Star Pulse Wave to deal with the heavy amount of ordnance that may be coming your way. The majority of your Necron fleet in general are going to be faster than most other ships in the game just by their normal movement speed. However, the Tomb ship goes on par with the Imperial Navy type of fleets, so they will have difficulty being mobile throughout the course of the battle. You a lot of the times want to hang on to your inertialist drive to be able to bait out certain maneuvers or certain weapons from your opponent. It requires a really good knowledge of what your opponents are capable of, what all the factions are bringing to the battle, for you to come out ahead in a lot of these circumstances. Proper planning and careful positioning is going to be key, for like I said before, the inertialist drive, as flexible as it can be due to the amount of distance you can jump, it doesn't reduce the cooldown of your inertialist drive. You can reduce it further by your reload stance, mind you, but this is only a 20% reduction, which will bring it down to a minute cooldown time. And that one whole minute can feel like an eternity if you put yourself in a bad position. Even with the ability to recover from light damage on your ships, if your engine's ever destroyed, you also lose access to your inertialist drive until it becomes repaired, either from the passive regeneration or one of your abilities to pure medical reconstruction. And while I said the Necron don't really have the best means of doing lots of damage rapidly due to the heavy reliance on their particle whips and lightning arcs, there is some very potent abilities you can have access to as skills. The Lightning Link and the Transdimensional Thunderbolt can be really good sources of damage, but they require really delicate use to get value out of without putting yourself in a dangerous position. The Lightning Link can almost instantly kill a ship on its own, while the Transdimensional Thunderbolt has unlimited charges to allow you to use it in long-term battles. The Scarab Swarm also does a good amount of damage over time, but it is more of a hybrid type ability in that it also adds to the regeneration of your ships. And the close range required of this ability can make it tricky to get full damage value out of. But on top of these three abilities, you don't really have much means to kill things quickly, outside of absurd focus fire from the sheer amount of macro cannons that you have access to for a lot of your ships. You have the Horror Cruiser that is equipped with 80 of these lightning arcs just by itself. However, like a lot of the cruisers and a handful of the light cruisers, you only have access to these on the broadside of your ship, whereas the Care and Tomb ships and your battle cruisers have access to full 270-degree arcs, so how you utilize them will vary greatly as opposed to these ships. You'll also need to pay attention to which ships have access to Star Pulse waves if you're going to rely on these for destroying ordnance. For the Horror and the Grand Cruiser, the Scourge, do not have access to these Star Pulse waves, even though all the other cruisers and above have access to this ability. And even the Secam, the light cruiser variant of our Necron fleet, also have access to Star Pulse wave, at the cost of a lot of its macro cannon power. So being aware of this fact, so you can assemble your fleet properly for said ordnance and abilities, can be essential. But even if you don't rely so much on the Star Pulse wave to be for defensive means, you also have access to, as I already mentioned, the Doom Scythes. Every single one of your cruisers and capital ships will have multiple charges of this ability. And these are also really damn mobile and resilient type of ships in comparison to other factions, and absurdly dangerous if used in the right circumstances. Any ship that loses its engines or burns out its entire combustion gauge or its mobility cooldowns will be left vulnerable to a vicious assault of the Doom Scythes. And this can do a lot of damage over time, especially when you consider that they are also shooting down the point defense of your vulnerable victim, allowing more value out of your Doom Scythes, whereas bombers would be easily destroyed. Although, as I hinted at already, they also want to destroy torpedoes and fighters, so having isolated ships or crippled ships that get distance from the rest of their allied fleet is important to get the most out of these fighters. For as soon as fighters or torpedoes get launched, they will disengage from the capitalist ship they are engaged with and fly off to attack said torpedoes or fighters, which can burn out a lot of the 9-second duration of the Doom Scythe ability. And with the changes now implemented into Battlefleet Gothic Armada, it will also lock the cooldown of your other abilities, for the Doom Scythes are affixed to your command tab, which normally, so long as your fighters are out, you lose access to your Emecratic regeneration, which is basically the Necron's version of Call to Arms. So normally these Doom Scythes will kind of be relegated to defensive purposes for the situation you don't have the Star Pulse wave in abundance, or you're holding it back for another occasion. Either way, this allows you to deal with small amounts of torpedoes and bombers relatively easily, and for situations when you have to deal with an overwhelming amount of torpedoes or bombers, you have access to your inertialist drive and the Star Pulse wave to kind of destroy them all in one single blow, or evade them entirely. Especially if you position yourself close enough to a gas cloud or asteroid belt, for due to the fact the inertialist drive is instantaneous as opposed to progressive like the Wraithbone Shift and the All-Ahead full of the other factions, you can lose visibility of the opponent's ship even if they have fighters or other abilities on top of you, as you clear enough of that distance to render yourself invisible if you position yourself properly. Although due to the fact that Necrons rely heavily on their armor and have absolutely no shields to use for long-term engagements, every single shot that is aimed at your ships has a chance of being a critical hit, every single one of them. So you're going to be a lot more prone to taking critical hit damage over time, and slowly but surely your ships are going to get crippled as a result. Thankfully this will be regenerate over time due to the passive regeneration of your reactive hull. If you lose your engines at a bad time, you will be incredibly vulnerable to whatever weaponry they have to bear. Imperial Navy with their armor-piercing ammo on top of their torpedoes, Adeptus Mechanicus with their Novacans, which is the most problematic ability Necron have to deal with, due to the fact that while even their light cruisers are incredibly mobile compared to the majority of other fleets, if a Novacan is aimed properly, you don't have the easy means of dodging them. And the biggest risk of any Necron fleet is taking multiple Novacans at once. In an odd, controversial type of method to help spread out the damage and prolong your ships, you want to kind of hang on to your inertialist drive until you're about halfway through the onslaughts of Novacans or abilities that are being thrown at you, if it is coming at a steady rate. Because for as soon as you jump with the inertialist drive, if you jump too early, you're leaving yourself open to 3 or 4 Novacans immediately jumping on top of your ship, and you will have no means to evade it, rapidly losing a large portion of your health instantly, if not losing the ship entirely. So spraying out that damage to allow your hull to regenerate, especially in combination with the reactive hull shift, is going to be important. But at the end of the day, the Novacan is still perhaps the most problematic weapon you have to deal with as the Necron fleet, due to the sheer amount of damage that you'll be taking over time. Adeptus Mechanicus are really the only faction you're going to be encountering these Novacans, whereas the Imperial Navy very rarely utilize the Dominators or any ships that have Novacans on their ships. But if you can weather that storm and use up all the charges of the Adeptus Mechanicus Novacans, you are able to weather the storm of lances incredibly well with the use of the reactive hull shift. It will allow you to mitigate a large portion, almost all the lances that are being shot at you, but it will put you at a bit of a handicap either way for the remainder of this battle. Keeping your distance will keep you safe from the macro cans as well as the armor-piercing ammunition that any of the factions may be using against you at close range, and due to your perfect aim of all your macro weaponry, you are encouraged to keep them at arm's length a lot of the times, while waiting for those key moments where you could dive in there for a vicious counterattack of a near instantaneous kill with with access to the abilities that you have. You need to plan properly ahead of time due to the slow mobility of your bigger ships in general, and deliberate use of the inertialist drive to make those big power plays, where they be jumping completely out of range of the opponent's fleet, forcing them to use up more of their all-head full or Wraithbone ships to try and chase you, or jumping in there, flying directly behind or flanking an opponent after they launch all their torpedo salvo on what they believe to be a helpless tomb ship. You have potentials to make massive power plays, but you need to burn the mobility and the abilities of your opponents and catch them while it's on cooldown. Now I'm going to talk a little bit of the 2 fleets that I utilized during my time with the Necron fleet, one of which I completely adore is the 5 Shrouds and 4 Jackal fleet. This is a very simplistic type of fleet that rely on the sheer mobility of the Shrouds, complemented, as the name would suggest, the Shroud Hull. This allows them to be permanently stealth at the start of the battle, and anytime you conceal yourself with either solid running or a gas cloud effect, you will permanently keep that stealth effect even if you were to change stances. This allows you to empower your weaponry for the situation at hand without leaving yourself open to long-range harassment a lot of the time. And it also complements well by the sheer amount of lightning arcs you have, which almost always will obliterate any frigate that has 200 health on it. It's a great way to instantly blind a lot of factions with their ships, and with the combination of the structural analyzer, which doubles the critical hit chance of your lightning arcs so long as the targets are marked by a scanner pulse, you can rapidly and over time cripple a lot of the opponent's ships there and leave them primed for either close range engagements or to just separate them and whittle them down by continuous fire of lightning arcs. And due to the sheer speed of these ships, you can jump out of the way, or even in a lot of circumstances you can try and dive in on frigates with the inertialist drive, so long as you give yourself enough breathing room to disengage from the capital ships themselves. Although this fleet has fallen out of favor a little bit due to the capture change mechanic in a recent patch at the time of this recording, so light cruisers are not as capable of grabbing the objectives and doing hit and run engagements as they did before, which is a lot of what the Shroud fleet here focused on a lot of the time. It was meant to grab the objectives, especially the opponent's objectives, and force them to spread out and leave them vulnerable to the whittling fire of your lightning arcs. With good use of hold fire and your inertialist drive to kind of reposition yourself, you can catch opponents completely flat-footed a lot of the time, so long as you thin out the number of frigates they have access to. Although do keep in mind the inertialist drive will reveal you, so using this as a means of mobility is not always recommended for any of your ships a lot of the time, unless you feel like you're not going to get punished by revealing, say, your tomb ship or your scourge in the early portions of the match to try and jump and grab at early objectives. Now for the second fleet I utilize a lot is pretty similar to what I explained with the Shroud fleet, only I swapped out 2 of the Shrouds and 2 of the Jackals for the tomb ship. This works a lot better with what I said already with the capture mechanics of the objectives, for the battleship is king of grabbing points, and when you're able to instantly travel 9,000 range, it is good at doing that in rapid bursts a lot of the time. The Shrouds will be used to kind of scout out the opponent due to their enhanced sensor range, without having to rely on scanner pulses to detect what the capital ships are. And all the while, they will also soak up a lot of the damage, as well as provide the additional fighters needed to deal with any torpedoes or bombers that may be trying to get at your tomb ship. For a lot of the times, it's going to be the focus of any engagement, which is what it excels at, if utilized properly. Now, the key abilities that are going to be insurmountable for getting the most out of your Necron fleet are going to be as followed here. With the pure medical reconstruction, as I mentioned before, you're going to be suffering a lot of critical hits throughout the course of the battle, even at maximum range where you're going to be taking very little macro damage. This is still going to be essential for when you start taking those permanent hits, ideally, or for instantly recovering any inconvenient engine critical hits you may be suffering. It does incur a 3-minute cooldown, so you need to wait till the last possible second to get the most out of this ability. Lightning Link is just absurd for the damage potential it has to offer. It simply put links 2 of your ships together there in a little bit of a lightning chain, and any ship that crosses it or is in the middle of that beam is going to take an absurd amount of damage, 60 damage a second, ignoring armor. So if you can somehow get the ship in there for a full 20 seconds, you are doing enough damage to destroy light cruisers single-handedly, and just about destroy any other regular cruiser with the 1,200 points of damage that you're unleashing. However, this also has a 3-minute cooldown on it. You want to use this deliberately. You want to use this for a situation where an opponent has either its engines destroyed or has no means to easily get out when you make your maneuver. A lot of the times you can use like one of your frigates to serve as a sacrifice in some sense, if you are very certain you can get the kill with the Lightning Link. The Transdimensional Bolt, I talked about this already, as well as all the other damage abilities, but this encourages a little more longer range type of engagements. While it may only be able to shoot at a maximum of 4,500 range, which is basically point blank range, it will still travel across the entire map. So for factions like Orcs and maybe the Tyranids that don't have the easiest means to reposition and turn their heading, this will still likely do damage, even if they are not quite that close. It has a 60-second cooldown on it, so you're going to get a lot of charges out of this, in combination with the fact that it does have unlimited charges. Scarab Swarm, this is the final one of the 3 abilities I talked about doing damage, and like I said, this is a bit of a mix of doing a lot of AoE damage to your opponent, while augmenting your health regeneration at the same time. You ideally want to get both effects going at once there, because it's not nearly as potent as, say, the Tau Empire's repair drones, so the damage is kind of necessary if you want to get the most out of this. But since it requires 45 seconds to get the full damage effect out of it, you are going to be committing yourself to a drawn-out battle. And Mass Recall is a very unique ability that can be tricky to utilize depending what your flagship is. It will instantly recall all the ships to your flagship identifying them in the process, mind you, but it serves as another means of mobility for when your ships are getting isolated or getting pushed back to the core of the map. Mind you, it only has very limited charges. A light cruiser only have access to a single charge, where the battleship will have access to 3 charges. Used properly, this will get you out of a bind and get you in a superior position without having to rely on your inertialist drive to change your heading. Although do keep in mind, with mass recall as well as the inertialist drive, your heading is fixed based on where you're going. So if you were to inertialist drive directly behind your ship, you're going to be doing a complete 180 turn, whereas the mass recall, its heading is entirely based on the heading of the flagship itself. So do keep that in mind in case your opponent's tenacious enough to continue to pursue you. Now for the upgrades that are going to be essential here, Tesseract Crypt can be a very underrated type of upgrade, but due to how unique your stances are to all of the Necron ships, it can be incredibly essential to keep access to your stances, especially if you are relying on winning in a game of attrition with a dispersed lightning arc stance. Losing that stance is going to be devastating to your strategy, and even with the reliance on light cruisers and assault running, this allows you to permanently keep your assault run active even if your decks are damaged and destroyed. Nightmare Shroud can be an effective upgrade for your flagship if morale damage is useful for a drawn out fight. It does require you to be in the reload stance for its effect to kick in, but all you need to do is be within the 9,000 range, and hell, if you have this upgrade on a Shroud, it extends the sensor range so that way you can do morale damage even at 13,500 range. It's a very sinister and surprisingly effective means of damaging morale over the course of a battle. Structural Analyzer feels like it's almost essential just due to the fact that since you don't have lock on, your only means of enhancing your critical hit chance to cripple opponents is through this upgrade here. And it makes the frigates even more valuable as a result, and due to the fact that the scanner pulses have 45-second duration, you only need 2 frigates to be constantly chaining to get permanent effect of this ability, regardless of what stance you're using. At the end of the day though, Necrons as a faction can be a very frustrating race to play as, due to the sheer amount of preparation you need and understanding of all the other factions in the game. As the one biggest weakness of the Necron fleet in general is the sheer amount of burst damage that a lot of factions can have to bear on you, and you are very vulnerable to heavy boarding damage as well. Even though your troop complement can also regenerate over time, Necron can't really win the match quickly. So when you have to deal with Ashuriani that have access to 8 torpedoes for each of the cruisers that they have to bear on you, or the Adeptus Mechanicus that almost always will have 5 Nova Cannons to throw on your Karn Tomb ship, you are very likely going to be suffering a very quick and devastating defeat. It remains to be seen if there is still some fine-tuning that needs to be done with the Necron fleet in these manners, but otherwise, if you are able to spread out the damage and prolong the health of your ships, you will eventually wear out your opponents. And when you win in such a manner, it feels incredibly empowering. I thank you all for watching. I hope this video has been helpful, and I will see you on the battlefield.